So you have reckless, prudent, deliberate, and inadvertent. So we have probably the worst is in the top left quadrant, where it's deliberate and reckless. So this is something that you knew was bad, and you did it anyways. So that's pretty much the worst behavior you could have. Now you have the inadvertent, but still reckless. So you got a guy, sawing off a branch off of a tree. I mean, might not be bright. You could has a briefcase and he's ready for just about anything. Then you have the bottom right, and we have Mr. Magoo. Oh, he did it again. Those are those types of situations where you smell like a rose, but he was totally inadvertent. You didn't do anything, you didn't do any planning. These are the people that you always hate in your life. That walk into a place and they're like, oh, I found this. And then all of a sudden they're like, find the winning lottery ticket or something. So here's a technical or some examples. I didn't really make it all one day. I kind of feathered in some smaller examples. So reckless the hospital. We see a problem with that. 486 computers, they're not really around that being manufactured. No one's actively making them. Now you have a flu season coming up. You look on eBay, wow, these 486 laptops just, aren't around as they used to be. And now we're stuck with this technology, the software, and we have no other options but pay the arm and the leg that someone's asking for on eBay. More than likely it's going to be junk, but then you have to go buy a bunch of other parts to try to salvage another 486 laptop. So I kind of see this a lot in the power industry. Power industry, everything runs for eons. It was meant to run for eons. It was meant to, the life expectancy and shelf life of this stuff is 40 years. So what ends up happening is the system was put in here and they spent millions upon millions of dollars to get it to run and get it to work. And basically they kind of look at it and say, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's still working. It's still running. Why is there a problem? Well, because they started connecting their substations or their power plants to the internet. Or maybe they put it in some sort of WAN or some sort of MPLS system or network, and it's then connected to their corporate environment. But still, now we have connection. These systems used to be completely isolated, but now they're starting to become more connected. So the inadvertent reckless. What do you mean you can't find anyone that can still program COBOL? It's just one of those things where someone just didn't think, oh, maybe we should upgrade this software over time. It's still running something that's 20 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, an old mainframe. And now we can't find anybody else to actually update the system on a regular basis or try to fix it when it's broke. I mean, you can maybe ask around, or maybe you don't even have a succession plan. Maybe you go to that, that old gray-beard Unix guy, and you say, hey, do you have any buddies that know COBOL? Oh, maybe. Well, how many can you name? Well, maybe 5. Then you have to ask the question, well, how many of them are still alive? Well, so that's a little bit of my joke on COBOL, but it's not something that a lot of people are being taught in school. So on this bottom right one, we have, it's a good thing these systems are air-gapped, and we have this vulnerability that came into CVE, whatever, Windows or whatever it is. But because it's not connected to any type of network and it's a completely isolated island off network, it's not going to have a problem, because then you can't, it's a remote exploit. Well, that's not really going to be a problem if it's completely isolated. Then you have the top right. So this is the better of the different behaviors. So back when the 2003 servers were kind of becoming end of life, this was kind of an issue, and this is always an issue with any type of regulatory organization or framework, from PCI to HIPAA to NERC to whatever whatever flavor of standard you want to look at. If it's no longer supported, that means it's no longer getting patched. If it's no longer getting patched, that means you can't get security flaws corrected. So then you have to start creating more mitigating controls on top of that. And then it becomes this big rat's nest of something that you've tried to patch on your own, put mitigating controls on it, and it's still vulnerable. So in this situation, they kind of had a little bit of a plan. They said, okay, 2003 is going to become end of life. It's in our budget to replace these systems. We're not going to be able to meet the compliance deadline, but we do have a plan to go through and upgrade all these systems, and we should be able to do it in the next 3 to 6 months. It's a plan, it's measurable. You can tell an auditor. See, that's the other thing too. Within this whole entire quadrant of things, pretend you're either on the stand talking to a lawyer, or pretend you're sitting in front of an auditor. If what you're doing doesn't sound good or smell good, it's probably not going to sound good or smell good to an auditor, or to, a jury, so to speak. So here's another example. So now we start getting compliance then. So you start talking about technology. Well, here's some compliance stuff. Reckless deliberate. We must complete this project on time and hope for the best at audit. So what the heck does that mean? Did you not build that into your requirements when you were building the system? Didn't you know you already have to be compliant to these things? Well, what was the breakdown? Was it supply chain management? Was it procurement? They didn't write that in the requirements. What were the fall downs? Then we have inadvertent. What's a firewall rule? That's a problem. I've seen this. I've seen this in consulting. I mean, you get a lot of smaller businesses that are just running their stuff, and they hope, yeah, I got a POS system, it takes credit cards, I'm good to go. Well, if you don't have any firewall rules on that system, you're going to be in a world of hurt when you get breached. And then your credit card merchant bank is knocking on your door saying, hey, I think you might have been breached. I'm going to take it out of your account. And that happens. There's been some recorded situations like that with some smaller merchants. On the bottom right, we have, wow, we really dodged that bullet when we got outbid by that competitor, because that competitor and that project would have required us to be, HIPAA compliant, PCI compliant, GLBA compliant, whatever it would have been. So it's kind of like, oh, you dodged that bullet, that's great. Well, if your competitor bid on it, and you're going to be bidding on those types of projects, maybe we should think about, trying to become compliant with some of these things. Then we have more prudent situation. Yes, we did not implement that insert standard requirement, whatever it was, specific requirement, but our system can implement it. So let's say the password complexity rules. Now, granted, password complexity rules are kind of, they can go back and forth, talk about entropy and all those things, and sometimes the standards don't necessarily keep up with entropy-ish, things, but it's what it is. So if you don't meet the standard, you can, pay the fine or take the spanking or whatever you want to say about it, and go forward with it. Some standards allow you to have compensating controls if your systems can't handle those types of passwords. All right, security debt. So we're kind of looking at technology where it might impact, life or limb. Maybe it'll impact your business. more than likely, if you're a business, you're going to be worried about your business. Hopefully you think of life and limb and safety first, then business, but some businesses just don't think that way. That's what it is. So we have a security debt example. We have reckless and deliberate. We don't have to put on any controls or security technology in our corporate environment, since there are no required regulations in our corporate environment. Management would only push back anyways. So let's say they had a payment card system, or they had a environment for their generation system, or whatever it is for a power company or for a hospital. And a lot of times with organizations, they treat their corporate environment as like the wild, wild west. Anything goes. And then they just have this really secure environment. Well, maybe there should be some minimal requirements within your corporate environment that should be sort of flushed out throughout the rest of the entire environment. Because a lot of times you're going to use your corporate environment as that springboard to go attack those really sensitive environments. So then we have inadvertent and reckless. What do you mean all of our student records and student healthcare records are accessible to the whole entire internet? I have seen this. This happens. And unfortunately, that particular regulator, which is FERPA, just say, don't do that again. That's the way HIPAA was too, but now they kind of threw down the gauntlet and have been serving up multi-million-dollar fines for people of gross negligence. So once again, it's probably a security issue, a security of information. Probably the first one. That's probably just general security and protecting information assets, maybe control assets, depending on what your business is. Because if you think of assets in general, it really encompasses a lot of things. Some people think of information as like the only asset in cybersecurity, but really that's not true. You have information, definitely. You have people, you have processes, you have physical buildings, and you also have technology. So if you think of it that way, and you think of your different types of risks and what you're trying to protect, you really kind of get a better understanding of what is the goals that you're trying to accomplish within your security program, or your information security program, or your compliance program. And of course, like I was saying before, when you're thinking of your company, money over people. People is one of those assets, money is an asset. These are all things we need to protect, and it's really up to the business and the business's goals and their risk analysis of saying what is important to our business, what will keep us surviving as a business, what will protect our assets within our business to keep it running. So we have up top on the right, we have prudent. There is a medium vulnerability found in one of our business critical systems. However, we were already planning on replacing that whole system within the next 6 months. We have compensating controls for it. So this is just a prudent, technical debt situation. There's, we're not getting rid of all the debt. Probably getting rid of all the debt would just be put the patch on and call it a day. But if you're already replacing these systems and it's going to take you, let's say it'll take you 6 months to apply all those patches because they're all in separate systems and separate geographical locations to actually apply them, and you're already going to be replacing them. It doesn't make any fiscal sense, and it's not really going to save you much because you're going to be replacing them anyways. And then you have the bottom right. It's a good thing our HR system forces us to use good access controls, or we could have been part of that whole entire recent breach. So this is one of those things where it's like, we didn't plan on having this information, protected. We didn't plan on doing these access controls, but when we set up the system, it just forced us to use these password policies, or it forced us to have to use some form of a callback system, or for two-factor. So one of the biggest points to sort of take away from all of this, can you get rid of all your technical debt, or all of your security debt, or all of your compliance debt? The answer is no. It's the same thing with risk. Can you get rid of all your risk? No, you can't. But you can mitigate as much as you possibly humanly can to a reasonable assurance. So how do we reduce these things? So how do we reduce debt, whether it's technical, security, compliance? I actually found this a really interesting read when I was doing some of the research. First, we need to determine what the factors that contribute to our technical debt is. And what they sort of came up with, and it's a little bit of an eye chart with it, leadership. And I guess what they did is they kind of did a little bit of a survey with this, and they did some analysis with a couple of different companies. I believe this was more on the true technical debt terminology. But one of the big things I talked about is leadership within the organization. If you don't have buy-in from upper management within an organization, if you're trying to implement compliance, you're trying to upgrade a system, or trying to make it easier for you to maintain, or if you're trying to be secure or compliant, if you don't have buy-in from upper management, it's not going to fly. Or you're going to be running this uphill battle for your whole entire career at that place. And it's probably going to be short because you're going to just become frustrated. So this is hopefully, if you can take this type of concept and talk to management about it and sort of discuss it with them, hopefully you can get that buy-in from your leadership. So that way they can buy in on it. And then they can start spreading it around and start enforcing it downwards, as opposed to you trying to fight everything up. Oversight. So that's that orange area. It's about 25% of the issues. If there's no accountability, there's no oversight, no one's assessing anything, no one's reviewing anything, you don't know if you're doing well or not. So that's where assessments come in. That's where risk assessments come in. That's where pen tests come in. Vulnerability assessments. Maybe end user acceptance. All those different types of assessments and oversight and compliance of sometimes, or internal compliance of some kind, help you at the end of the day figure out where you are and where you need to be and what are the gaps. 20%. Outdated systems. Well, that's kind of what I was talking about with the technical debt. You have outdated systems that you have to do a complete forklift. You can't just buy onesie-twosie systems or upgrade one portion of it or a component of it. You have to completely forklift the whole entire system. This happens a lot in the power industry. Like I was saying before, these systems were meant to last for 40 years. And for them to replace one component of it, you have to replace the whole thing. This thing's bolted inside of a huge cabinet. It's not just a tiny little thing here, or one computer here, or a server there. It's one big gosh darn unit. So they literally have to forklift it out. Same thing for generators in generating units. You don't just replace. You can maintain it over time, but after a while, you might have to do a complete forklift. And a lot of times, what ends up happening, if you are running a plant and you have to forklift the whole entire generator, just a little bit of a comparison, a generator is pretty gosh darn huge normally, especially like a combined combustion or a gas combustion or whatever you're looking at. They have huge turbines and huge system that's as big as the whole entire building. And it's all underground for the most part. There's only like certain parts that's actually showing for the actual exciter and the actuator and stuff within the generator. So you literally have to do multiple forklifts of something like that. Misspending. So this kind of goes back to, the leadership. This goes back to the oversight. This goes back to the technology, having outdated systems. If you don't have management buy-in, you can't get on the budget. You don't have any oversight. You don't know if stuff's working or not. You have outdated systems. Well, if you didn't even do your assessment, you don't even know if you have outdated systems. I mean, yeah, you can maybe tell, if it's 20 years old, you're probably going to have to update it. But once again, if you don't do all those different types of things and see where you are and where you need to be, how can you appropriately spend your dollars over time? And this is where that technical debt comes in. This is that balloon loan that I was telling you about. You now have this outdated system that services many, 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 many people. And you're kind of stuck with it now. Because in order to do a forklift, it costs more money than your whole entire company has in the till. There's nothing budgeted for it. But you're going to have to limp it along until you can get through. And so something like that could, over time, possibly tank a company. And that's where a lot of creativity comes into play too when you have that type of problem. Then you also have a nice little chunk. It's only 10%, but I think it's a pretty, but I think it kind of goes back to the oversight. Process chaos. No one knows what the process is. No one knows how the process works, except for maybe you, and maybe that other guy that had to cover for you during vacation. That's not a good process. That's not a good institutionalized process. And if you don't have those types of things, moving up or moving into another department sometimes will become impossible within the company you're working for. Because you don't always want to be doing the same thing day in, day out, every single day. At least I don't. So in summary, what's the point of all this? This could be a tool to be used to communicate to the potential impact of a decision made for technology, compliance, or security processes. This could also be used as a high-level criteria to assess internal controls, maybe even help build priority around which issues to tackle and when. This could also be used to help provide a little bit of feedback into your risk assessment or risk register efforts. So if you have a really, really big organization, a lot of times you might have a risk register or a risk assessment process where you actually track your different types of risks and you understand what all your internal controls are that mitigate those risks. This could be a good way to sort of take a step back and say, okay, well, what's the current state of our environment? How do we improve it? So with that, that's all I got. Any questions, concerns, comments? Nope. Yep.
Did you run into this in your current job or previous jobs?
Yes.
And if you did, what was the outcome? Are you able to reduce that at all?
So just a little bit of background on me. I'm actually a regulator, so I deal with a lot of power companies. And so we end up seeing this type of thing all the time. This is rampant. It's pretty well known that, like I was telling you before, power companies run really, really old systems. And kind of the mantra is, if someone else isn't doing it, why should I do it? Or if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so one of the things that we've kind of gone through, a little bit of a renaissance with that framework for NEOISF, is that we're kind of at that place of zero tolerance compliance, which is kind of like what PCI is. And what we're trying to get towards is a more risk-based approach and internal controls, where you're trying to build controls within an environment. And some of the organizations are having a hard time wrapping their head around a lot of, why would I build internal controls? What's a good internal control? How do I identify internal controls? And they didn't understand, well, what is your risk? What is your debt? What are you dealing with? What are you spending money on? These are all things that you have to be able to answer in order to even tackle internal controls or tackle risk. So that's kind of where I've used this and sort of talked through with it. I also used it when I was doing consulting as well. And so a lot of times I would say, okay, well, what are you having problems with? Well, why are you even doing this assessment to begin with? And a lot of times you sort of have them tell you why they're doing it. And then you start thinking, okay, well, you have this type of system, that type of system, and you start saying, okay, well, you have all these different systems. Do you know what they're doing? Do you know how they're being managed? Do you know how your IT department's running? Do you know how your security department's running? Can you even detect that a vulnerability came in and something actively exploited you and they took all your data and copied it and sent it over to China or to Russia or wherever else? No, I don't have that capability. Well, why? Well, it's because I never put any thought into it. I don't have the resources to do it. Well, why didn't you spend resources on that? Well, I don't know. Well, did you spend a bunch of money on this new system over here? Yeah. Why? It did what I wanted to do. Great. But what about all the other stuff around it? I didn't think about that. And so you start getting into these types of scenarios where you just start talking through things and stuff starts clicking, and they just never really sat down and said, well, what risks am I really taking on? What type of debt am I taking on that I'm gonna have to pay later? And so that's the type of stuff that I've used over time. So, anyone else? Cool. Thanks.
Thank you, David. So we started a little bit late, so we're going to go ahead and run into it. But before we